You're landing a fish and it hits the carpet of the boat, that's a 2-minute penalty. That's a fish landing penalty. The angler has to put his rod down. He has to sit there. They start the clock and he sits there in the boat. Intense. They're competing for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, the ultimate goal and dream is we want to be just like the PGA or NASCAR. The top guys, they're making $1 million plus a year. The bottom tier guys, they're still making low 6-figure. Bethel University, in Tennessee is on the map due to bass fishing. And they offer scholarships to anglers to come in and go to school there and compete on their team. Like, that's probably the number one question I get asked about when I go down there. Have you ever been ice fishing? And I'm like, we caught 7 walleyes over 30 inches, which if you catch a walleye over 28 inches, that's considered a trophy. 20 years later, I got that job at FLW, and now I'm working with some of the old school pros that we see on TV, Bill Dance and Jimmy Houston, and these guys that had TV shows back in the day that my grandpa was a huge fan of.
If you love bass fishing or fishing in general, or heck, even an outdoor enthusiast that just enjoys a nice day on the lake, then this podcast is for you, because today we are going behind the scenes on one of the biggest fishing leagues to date, the MLF, with Joe, who is working in their PR. He's going to show us behind the scenes and talk to us about what it's like on day of events, some of the rules and regulations, some funny stories, tips on how to get started even in this league, and how to get sponsorship and how to make your way to the top from beginning to all the way to professional. And adding in there some tips and some underrated lakes that he suggests that did surprisingly well. So without further ado, let's not miss the boat on this one, and let's get right into it. Welcome to the Princeton Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in and around Princeton. Join your hosts, Zach, Mary, and Kim, 3 locals who live and work right here in Princeton, as we bring you the latest events, exclusive interviews with local businesses, and stories that make our town special. Your community, your stories, your podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Country Pup Kennel, everything your dog needs under one roof.
All right. Well, welcome, Joe.
Thanks
for joining us. We're excited to learn about Major League Fishing today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk a little fishing.
Dude, anytime we get the opportunity to talk about fishing, count me in.
Right
and
on.
when Kim's like, yeah, Joe can come in, he's a professional fisherman and he's got the world record.
Yeah.
And
I was going to say, whoa, not quite.
Well, I thought we were talking about fishing. That's how it goes, right?
And I'm certainly not a professional fisherman, but I do work with a lot of professional
We're
fishermen.
all
The best
professional.
bass
Yeah.
Isn't everybody professional?
Yeah. That is kind of the gimmick is, I mentioned that I work in fishing, and everybody knows somebody. So they're always like, do you know John Smith from Andover? He's my uncle, and he fishes. And I'm like,
that's so true.
Never
so
really
true.
heard the name before, but yeah, I'm sure he's great,
Yeah.
So yeah.
That
absolutely.
is so true, though. Everyone, like, if you bring up fishing stories, someone knows somebody that's a friend or a family member that's like, they're a professional fisherman.
Yeah.
Their
Yep.
boat. Or
Professional guide, professional fisherman.
Yeah, they just don't have the boat and the logos, but they're professional. And
Sure.
like all the things.
Yeah, exactly. I guess, if you make money fishing, you can call yourself a professional fisherman, however you do that, whether it's
Right.
through tournaments or guiding or any of the other options that are out there.
Yeah. Well, how about you just kind of share a little bit about your story growing up fishing, how you found yourself even in the job position that you are, and what does that even look like when you say, I work with fishing? We could probably answer that one first and just kind of like give the context of the conversation that we'll have today, and then we'll kind of dive into some other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Onamia, right on Mille Lake on the southern end. Fished pretty much my whole life, but never extremely passionate about it. I kind of realize now how much I took that for granted living on, the shores of one of the best fisheries in the country.
Right.
But I went over to school at St. Cloud State, and I chose my major of public relations because I knew that I wanted to work in pro sports, but I also knew that I wasn't enough of an athlete to get there that way. So I was going to have to work in the front office and kind of use my strengths. So I've always been a pretty good writer, and I can talk fairly decent. So I looked at different jobs in the front office role, and PR seemed like a good fit. PR is basically generating media coverage for the entities, whether it's the Minnesota Vikings or the Minnesota Twins. It's working with media, getting media coverage, things like that. So out of college, graduated in 2008 from St. Cloud State, And I bartended for a couple of years because it was kind of right at the end of the recession, and not a lot of companies were hiring at the time. But in 2011, I started with a company out of Hopkins, Minnesota called FLW, which was Fishing League Worldwide. I started with them as an internship. I just found it on social media, threw my name in the hat, and pitched myself as this great angler. I grew up on the shores of Mille Lake. I've been fishing my whole life. This is a dream job for me. And they gave me a chance. They brought me on as an intern, 3-month internship. And 2 months into it, they offered me a full-time position. They said, we want to start you in our PR department. And it was a dream come true. It was finally a real job, a salary and benefits and all that. So heck yeah, I jumped on it. And I've been with them ever since. So this was October of 2011. Was with the company for 8 years, and in 2019, FLW was acquired by Major League Fishing. At the time, there were kind of 3 major tournament organizations, and these are not kind of the local tournaments that are here in Minnesota. These are the ones that are on Discovery Channel, ESPN. This is the top level of professional bass fishing, and so one of the companies, Major League Fishing, bought out FLW. And so right now in the industry, there's 2 major companies, Major League Fishing and Bassmaster. Those are the 2 kind of main tournament brands. But I've been with Major League Fishing since 2019 when we were purchased. And again, just been doing PR and communications the whole time. So my job basically is we hold tournaments around the country every year, and I'll travel to these tournaments and generate local media coverage, spread the word that we're in town. We'll encourage local news crews to come out, get on media boats, or interview some of the competing anglers, or interview some of the fans that are there at our big expos and our big circus that we have when we come to town. And so that's pretty much the gist of my job, is just lining up media coverage and generating as much positive coverage as we can for the sport and our anglers.
Cool. So
Yeah.
do you have to go to these events?
I do. I travel to about 6 a year.
Okay.
And I'm on the road for about a week at a time. The events are 4-day events, but I'll come in usually into town a day or 2 early, and then stay through the event working. It's early mornings and kind of late evenings when I'm on site. I'm working almost all the time. And then, once the event wraps up, I'll fly home the next day. And so I've gotten to see some really, really cool places of the country
I bet.
that I never would have, dreamed of visiting before, places Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, because bass fishing is really big down in the southern half of the United States. But then as the season progresses every year, we move north. So we always start, Florida, Texas, Georgia, and then as the season progresses, we usually end in upstate New York and Michigan or Mille Lacs. We've held tournaments there
Have
before
you?
as well.
I was just
So,
going to
yeah.
ask if any are in Minnesota.
Yep.
Okay. So where's the head offices at?
Well, there was 2. One was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and one was in Benton, Kentucky.
Okay.
Once COVID hit, we closed down the Tulsa office, and now the entire circus lives in Benton, Kentucky. All of the operations staff, the people that actually run the tournaments, set up the trailers and weigh the fish, things like that, they all reside in Kentucky, but the rest of our staff is remote around the country. A lot of people still live in Oklahoma because that's where our headquarters was. But then there are also still some FLW kind of leftovers like myself that, still live here in Minnesota or just different places around the country.
Okay. So FLW was Minnesota.
Yep.
Okay.
So it was
Minnesota-based.
Yep. Erwin Jacobs, who used to be one of the owners of the Minnesota Vikings, like in the late 80s, and he was kind of a Minneapolis businessman known for kind of, taking over companies and fixing them and then flipping them, basically.
Yeah.
But he purchased FLW, excuse me, in the early 90s, and then built it up to this massive tournament organization that was on, Wheaties boxes and giving away $1 million first prizes for the first time ever in our sport and thing like that. And then, of course, we sold to Major League Fishing in 2018.
Okay.
That's
Cool.
awesome.
Yes, it is.
One of the first, so I've never been to an event like this. Could you walk through what the event looks like, feels like for somebody that's maybe never been to one? Is it spectator heavy? Is it mostly media? Is it all on water? Is there stuff on shore?
Sure.
What does it look like, from start to finish?
Yeah. So Major League Fishing runs tournaments across 5 different circuits, all the way from like high school fishing and college fishing, which Princeton has a high school team now, which is super exciting.
Yep.
So we hold tournaments for those anglers all the way up to the top level. And in doing so, there are different tournament formats. On the lower levels, high school, college, our BFL, which is kind of our weekend series for the everyday Joe working angler that still wants to compete. They'll go out on the water for a set period of time, usually 8 hours. They'll catch their 5 biggest bass that they can, and they'll catch fish all day, but they'll only keep their biggest 5, and they'll bring them in to the weigh-in. We've got big holding tanks that they'll come and they'll put their fish in while they're waiting their turn. They go up on stage, get their fish weighed, and then come off. On the Bass Pro Tour level, which are the events that I travel to, and those are the events that air on Discovery, those have a referee on the boat. So every angler has, a referee with them that's assigned to them for that day. The fish are caught, weighed immediately, logged into our Score Tracker live leaderboard system, and then immediately released. So there is no weigh-in for the Bass Pro Tour. But one of the unique things about that is everybody knows where they're at on the scoreboard at all times.
Yeah.
When you're bringing your best 5 in, you kind of think you may have a good shot or not. And then you could be surprised either way. Oh, man, another guy crushed them, and I'm not going to win this one. On the Bass Pro Tour, that allows you, by knowing the score at all times, when you need to, lay off, because it's a 4-day event. So fish management throughout the event is a big thing as well. You don't want to catch all your good fish on the first day, and then on day 2 and 3, you're scrambling to try to survive. So by knowing the score, you can know where you're at, or know if you need to make a Hail Mary. Gosh, I'm not catching them. The only chance I have is to catch a really big one, so I'm going to go throw a really big bait down the bank and hope for the best and kind of hope for that Hail Mary.
Right.
And when those moments happen, it makes some amazing TV, and it's so exciting, absolutely.
Right.
But to answer your original question, so the Bass Pro Tour are 4-day events. So they're usually Thursday through Sunday. And so Thursday and Friday are just pretty much TV only. We've got 10 live streaming cameras out on the water that are roaming constantly to whoever's catching them, because we know who's catching them due to the scoreboard.
On a boat.
Yep. And so these cameras are rope moving all the time. Everything is live streamed throughout the entire event. So you can, on MajorLeagueFishing.com, on My Outdoor TV, and they've got an app, on Rumble. So there's different spots where you can watch this tournament from minute to minute every single day of competition. On Saturday and Sunday, days 3 and 4 of the event, that's when we usually have our big fan activations. We'll have, a giant big screen set up out there. Usually it's outside somewhere in a park or at a Bass Pro Shops or things like that. Fans can come out. They can watch the live stream, what's going on in the water. Some of the pros that didn't make the cuts are now hanging out and are able to answer questions, sign autographs, meet and greet. We've got lots of vendors that usually come out, food trucks, things like that. And it's really just kind of a fun family type atmosphere to celebrate fishing. And then we'll end competition, and then the anglers will come off the water to that fan activation. And they'll come on stage, and there'll be highlights shown from throughout their day, and they talk about what happened, how they caught them, or how they didn't catch them, and things like that.
So less fish on actual ground, because everything is caught and released instantly.
Exactly, on
but
that Bass Pro
you
Tour
have like
level.
a highlight reel basically, because the TVs are out there, the camera crews are out there. You already have a highlight reel basically for each guy and like their moments.
Yep, and it's like Edwin Evers, talk about this fish. What were you thinking? And the highlights playing of him fighting this crazy big bass or something like that, and he can kind of walk you through what he's thinking at that time. So although we aren't showing off the fish necessarily, we do kind of still have a show.
Yeah. So the referee on the boat, I'm assuming there's multiple reasons why, but also weighing it instantly, is that to prohibit, people adding weight or stuff that's happened in the past, or is that?
Sure. Yeah. It is a way to keep everything fair and up and up. And there are multiple different ways we do that. In the lower tier circuits, we don't have a referee on every boat. So in those circuits, a lot of times there's what's called a boater and a co-angler. A co-angler doesn't supply the boat. They just show up to fish, and they get randomly paired with a different boater every day of competition. So there'll be 100 boaters in the tournament and 100 co-anglers. They get randomly paired. They have to sign off on each other's weights. And so they're both in charge of kind of keeping each other honest, and things like that.
Right.
Another requirement that we have is every boat is required to have a POV camera, whether it's a GoPro or an Ion camera, things like that. That has to be recording at all times. It has to give direct access to the boater on the front of the deck. And so if there are any discrepancies or anybody makes any challenges or things like that, we're able to go back and review the footage and see exactly what happened, things like that. So there are ways of enforcing, but you're exactly right. The referee on the boat is for that. They're also to enforce penalties because we have different penalties at that top level as well. If you're landing a fish and it hits the carpet of the boat, that's a 2-minute penalty. That's a fish landing penalty. You're not allowed to do that.
Why is that?
It can damage the skin and the membrane of the fish, like the natural slime that's on all fish.
Okay.
It's all about conservation and keeping the fish as healthy as possible. And so 99% of the time that doesn't happen. But when it does, that's a 2-minute penalty. The angler has to put his rod down. He has to sit there. They start the clock, and he sits there in the boat. And and so there's different penalties like that. When you release the fish, you can't just toss it over the boat. That's a 2-minute penalty as well. You have to put it down below the gunnel, release it back in cleanly. And so there's just various different rules like that. Absolutely. And that's just one rule that they enforce, of course.
Is the 2-minute rule like the longest one that there is, or is there...
Oh, no. There's flagrant penalties as well. It's never happened, thank God. But if an angler were to get frustrated and slam a fish or do something crazy like that, again, has never happened.
You're not big enough.
How dare you bite me?
It does get kind of testy out on the water sometimes, when it's really intense. They're competing for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that it will never happen. It's never happened in the 8 years that the tour has existed thus far.
Well, that's good.
But there are flagrant penalties as well with longer time penalties.
So just real quick, without taking too much time, can you go through a couple of those penalties to explain what that would look like and how long that would take? And
Sure. I mean, there's different types of penalties. Like I said, I've mentioned, the fish bouncing off the carpet or being released. Another penalty is you're allowed to fish only with one line, but if you break that penalty, it's a 2-minute penalty if you throw another line out. So oftentimes, as part of strategy, if an angler's got a school of bass fired up and they need to keep firing it in there, if for some reason, they've made a cast out and they're reeling in and they get hung up or something happens where they need to get another bait out there right now, they'll accept the 2-minute penalty and they'll grab another rod and they'll throw it out there to keep the school fired up. Boom, now they have to stop and take 2 minutes. But at least the school is still fired up. They're still going. They don't have to take the couple of minutes to retie another bait or things like that.
So when he casts out there, though, and he catches it, like, let's just say he gets one on, can he still reel it in, though, even though he's on a 2-minute penalty?
Yep, exactly. And once that fish gets landed and weighed and then released, then the penalty starts. So then he'll have to sit down things like that. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. And like I said, there's a whole kind of rule book of different penalties, fishing too close to competitors or fishing during off-limits
That's a real
times.
thing. You cannot fish next to me.
And also, we've got, off-limits periods on these different lakes. But some of these guys, live on these lakes. And so there have been inadvertent penalties, and it's usually an honor system where a guy will say, I wasn't even thinking about it, but I was fishing for crappie off my dock with, my grandson.
Right.
But it was technically during the off-limits period. For something like that, they wouldn't be disqualified from the entire tournament necessarily, but there would be a penalty. So they usually will have to, take a 10-minute starting penalty. Whereas when everybody takes off at 7:30 a.m. for the tournament start, they have to sit there till 7:40 until they can leave. So
longest 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So
better drink your coffee.
I bet. So the tournaments, just to make it for me to understand better, is it like a golf tournament where it's, because you said it's 4 days?
Exactly.
So is the cut after 2?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So we start with 50 guys. After the first 2 days of competition, only the top 25 guys move on. So half the field gets cut at the end of the day on Friday. On Saturday, day 3, the field of 25 will get cut to just the top 10. So then on Sunday, the final day, we've always got just the final 10 anglers out there, which means with 10 cameras, everybody has a camera in the boat now. And those are where we get, a lot of the content for the TV shows that go on Discovery, things like that. Because when there's 50 guys on the boat, there's 40 guys out there that don't have cameras. And so it just allows us to tell the story of the tournament better as we're filming television.
Very cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's super neat. Yeah, the first thing when you were talking about penalties earlier, though, I just kept thinking about those guys that were shoving weights down like fish's mouths.
Oh, and it's so unfortunate because, we work so hard to kind of legitimize our sport.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal and dream is we want to be just like the PGA or NASCAR or, kind of some of these niche sports that have grown massive. And that's kind of ultimately the goal and dream of Major League. We want to get to that level. But then when stuff like that happens, my grandma is calling me saying, "Did you see those guys sticking the weights down?" And that's the stuff that people hear and pay attention to. And it kind of just undoes all of the work that we've been doing to establish this legitimate sport. But I mean, that happens in life everywhere, I guess. But it certainly is frustrating.
Sure. Well, hunting and fishing in general, I think, is on a very big uptick from media standpoint, from a sports standpoint. Like it's just going... Like the last, 5 years, I feel like has been a very vertical up. So have you seen that on your end too? Because like on the consumer end, I've seen it where brands like FXR and these other brands are wanting to come in now and more partnerships are happening. Like, could you speak from that on your side? Yeah,
you're absolutely right. It was about 5 years ago. And I want to say, do you know why?
I'll let you just...
Okay, it was COVID.
Okay.
COVID was a boon for the outdoors industry because... there wasn't a lot to do. And so many people got involved in the sport at that point, buying new tackle, buying rods and reels, things like that. And so the sport really blew up about that time. Since then, it's subsided a little bit. The tackle sales aren't what they were 5 years ago anymore, or tournament participation isn't what it is 5 years ago. But it kind of ebbs and flows, as things happen in the country, good or bad, we kind of see that in our participation as well, because we do realize that it is kind of discretionary income when you're fishing tournaments and things like that. It's not a necessity necessarily. So as people have more freedom and income and stuff, participation goes up. But as things kind of tighten up and people are tightening their belt straps a little bit everywhere, then it kind of drops off a little bit. So.
Because this is becoming more of like a career that people could take, right? Because some of these winnings and some of the stuff that these tournament guys that are like, winning consistently or whatever, but like those are big cash prizes, right? Like, could you speak to it, to like what is average on what people are making or some of these grand prizes and how many of these people actually fish like full time?
Sure. Sure. So at that Bass Pro Tour level, those 50 anglers that fish at the top, they're pretty much all full-time anglers. They may have, a side gig in the off season that, he's owns a carpentry business that he may like work a little bit in the off season, but for the most part, these guys do it year round. We have the events through the year, but they're also working shows on the weekend. They've got sponsor fulfillments that they need to do. Most of these guys have a lot of major sponsors. So at that level, I would say, it's really hard to, there's a huge range, but the top guys, they're making $1 million plus a year. If the bottom tier guys, they're still making low six figures.
When you say bottom tier, are you saying bottom tier of the pro category?
Yep, of those 50 guys.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody there is making a pretty good living. But in the lower tier circuits, it's almost like Major League Baseball. Like once you get to the major leagues, you're doing well. But when you're in the minors, it's kind of a grind, Nobody's getting rich in the minors. And it's kind of that same way in fishing, maybe even a little more. When you in the weekend series, and we have a AAA series called our Toyota series. Like those guys that are working their way up, there is money to be made if you are very, very good and you're qualifying up to that Bass Pro Tour level.
Sure.
But there's also quite a few people that are just out there to have fun on the weekends and, maybe get lucky. And it's almost like a form of gambling almost for some people. Yeah.
Because the reason why I'm leading with that question too is like if somebody loves fishing and they're like want to pursue this and like even make it as a career, just like anyone would like in certain sports, like they want to be in the big leagues. Like, what
Sure.
would you say is the best route? What tournaments should you go to? Who should you talk to? And how often is it? Is there like a training day camp basically where they're like, they take a look at the best anglers, or they just look over a span of time and it said, hey, Joey's been crushing it at the tournaments. Should we get him on board with the pros? Like, how does that process work?
Sure. So basically, you want to start at the lowest level. If you're a high school angler, get involved with high school fishing or college fishing. Most colleges have college bass teams as well. But then MLF also has, the different circuits. I mentioned it's called the BFL, the Bass Fishing League, is kind of the lower tier circuit. Those are one-day tournaments. We hold 128 of those events every single year around the country, and so they're just spread out everywhere. So you can go to MajorLeagueFishing.com, you can find a tournament or tournament series near you, compete in those, and kind of work your way up from there. Through all the different levels, you kind of have to qualify into it. And so, people will move from the BFL up to the Toyota series. We've got one more step called the Pro Circuit, and that features, pros that compete on the Bass Pro Tour, as well as guys that are trying to make it in there. And so it's kind of another way to supplement their income, fish some more tournaments. But you have to finish well enough to qualify up to that next level, basically. But in doing so, that's when you also attract the attention of sponsors. As you're doing well, the big industry brands like Rapala and Abu Garcia and, non-fishing brands like Toyota and Bass Pro Shops, things like that, they will notice you and, bring you on board to their pro staff. And now you're supplementing your income with not only tournament winnings, but now you're getting paid from sponsors and things like that. And so that's basically how most of the people are making the money in the sport.
That's
is by
awesome.
sponsors.
A lot of it, yeah. A lot of guys will oftentimes have their sponsors, pay to compete in the tournaments, and then tournament winnings is kind of their earnings almost.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a good friend of mine. Her son went to, gosh, I hope I get this right, but I think Alabama, and took for college, and that's
Sure.
that's why he went, was bass fishing.
Yeah.
So he was in tournaments all the time, and he graduated, but now he's still. I mean, that's his thing, is bass fishing.
Sure.
So it's like,
and there have been
you can go
quite
to
a
college.
few Minnesota kids that do go down south.
Yep.
And go to colleges down University of Alabama, and Auburn University is another huge bass fishing powerhouse. And Murray State University in Kentucky is a huge bass fishing powerhouse. Bethel University. So some of these schools that people don't really, Auburn is not one of them, of course, but Bethel University, in Tennessee, is on the map due to bass fishing.
Yeah.
And they offer scholarships to anglers to come in and go to school there and compete on their team. So it's really been kind of cool to see that part of the sport grow as well.
Yeah, because that can be that's what I want to do when I grow up and go to college for it.
And we always say there's so many jobs in the industry other than actually just fishing too. Like
you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Writers, photographers, graphic designers, social media people. Like our tournament organization, we've got a huge kind of crew that behind the scenes works, and we love to fish, but we're not at that level. And so even if you just want to be involved in the sport, it's a great way to be exposed to it and kind of get experience.
Very cool.
Well, I think this is a great time to take a break.
Yeah. And then we
Sweet.
can learn more about Minnesota stuff.
Yeah,
Pick your
sounds good.
brain. All right.
We're 1 hour from the cities and 1 hour from the cabin. We're at the crossroads where good food, cold beer, and small towns collide. Princeton's got pizza that will change your road trip plans, tacos that belong on your camera roll, and a brewery that will probably just make you forget about where you're going. And if you're into adrenaline, our racetrack has got you covered. And if you're into chill, we have parks, rivers, trails, and enough space for you to breathe. Princeton, it's not on your bucket list, but
All right, we are back, and we are going to switch into more of local Minnesota and local lakes and pick your brain a little bit.
Sounds good.
So we have, the state 10,000 lakes, which I believe we actually have more than 10,000 lakes.
I've heard that too. Yeah, it's
So-
more than 10,000.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you know about the lakes, and what's the most popular thing to fish in Minnesota. And
Where's the best fishing spots?
Yeah. I wish I knew. I wish I knew,
yeah.
because
All these tournaments.
I would be the pro angler then. But no, we live in a sportsman's paradise. We really do, with so many different fishing options. Basically, anywhere in the state, that's really unique and something that most other states across the country don't really have. And so the fishing here in Minnesota is phenomenal. Obviously, walleye is kind of the predominant species that everybody goes for. They're delicious. They're fun to catch. They're pretty much in all of the lakes, which is really fun. But yeah, we from bass to northern pike to walleye, there's just so many different options across the state that are available to us, and it's really something really special that we have.
Mm-hmm. So just for like the local anglers around here in Princeton, maybe Malacca, is there certain lakes around here that you recommend for someone that's like younger, just getting started in fishing, that you'd be like, hey, go and check out this lake or fish here?
I mean,
on the spot.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I wish that there was this magic lake where, go here and you'll catch them every time. But unfortunately, that doesn't exist. Fish move and different times of year and different climates and temperatures and weather, and all of those play a role. But the good news is, like, from the Rum River here in town to, Green Lake just outside of town, Knife Lake in Moras, Ann Lake in Ogilvie, like all of these lakes are fairly close, not as big or intimidating as Mille Lacs can be to a lot of people, and they're loaded with fish. I mean, I was out on Ann Lake just this past weekend over in Ogilvie. We caught, I don't know, half a dozen bass, a couple walleye, northern pike, and it was just fun to get out and just catch fish. And we didn't go far, it was just a 20-minute trip over to Ogilvie, 10 minutes to put the boat in water, and we were out there catching fish. So there's so many great options anywhere in the state, and it's really a lot of fun.
Do you think there's any like underrated ones here in Minnesota that, because Mille Lacs, I feel like it's the, Mille Lacs and Red, like
Sure.
like, there's those big ones that everyone knows about, but is there one that's kind of like under the radar that maybe you guys have fished at in a tournament, or like you yourself, or just that you know of? That's kind of just hidden gem.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would say Lake Pokegama up in Grand Rapids. We held an event, one of our team series events up there. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago at this point. But the lake showed out. Well, like living here, when I heard that we were going to Lake Pokegama, I was like, okay, we've got Leech Lake just down the road, or we could have gone to Mille Lacs, but all right, let's go to Pokegama. And the lake was phenomenal. They caught some giant bass there. They caught huge numbers of bass, and it made for a really, really great television show. It was a really intense battle between two anglers right down to the end, and one guy caught one right at the last 5 minutes to kind of seal the deal, and it was just an exciting television show. Really kind of opened my eyes to how special, that lake was that I didn't really realize. But honestly, there's so many good lakes up here. Like north of Mille Lacs, just, in that Aiken area, there's so many little lakes that are loaded with walleye and bass. Yeah. And everybody kind of goes to Mille Lacs, but if you just detour just a little bit off the beaten path, Bay Lake up there is a good one. Yeah. But there's just so many different options, and everywhere's got fish.
Yeah, you could you could just cover your eyes and run into a lake.
Yeah. I mean, you literally could throw a dart at the map and
land on
whatever lake is near there. Yeah, exactly. Go try it out. Yeah.
So our family goes to up near Bemidji every year we used to go for opener, but now we go Memorial Weekend.
Okay.
And the lake that we're on is Andrusia, but it's connected to Wolf and Cass Lake and these huge fishing lakes. And this past year, I think out of our whole group, there was one walleye caught.
Oh.
Yeah, it was mainly perch, which are my favorite fish to eat. But anyway, my brother-in-law came back. When we came back to Princeton, he went at a local lake here, Green Lake, and just hammered walleyes.
Yeah.
It's like...
It's frustrating,
15 minutes up the road.
Yeah. I was talking to my old college roommate yesterday, just random, and he had hired a guide. They were up at Breezy Point last weekend, and they went walleye fishing. They hired a guide and went out to Pelican Lake, and you would think, oh, I got a guide. We're going to crush them. They only got one walleye, too, all weekend long, and so they were fishing hard, and walleye are really finicky, and that's one of the kind of most frustrating and challenging parts of the sport is, there is no guarantee ever, and that's why it's called fishing, I guess, and not catching, We kind of always hear that adage. But
and here in Minnesota with our weather, I mean, I think water temperatures, when it gets warmer, if it gets warmer earlier in spring, or doesn't
Definitely.
that all matter to
Definitely.
where the fish are and how
Yep.
the fishing is?
Yep, where they're at in their basically their spawning patterns.
Yeah.
Early in the year they'll be up shallow spawning, and most of the time they're not really catchable at that point. But then when they're done, they come off and they go into some deeper water, and then they're really hungry, and then they're really easy to catch for a while, and then it gets really hot in summer, and then it kind
Yeah.
of shuts down again. And so, yeah, absolutely. Time of year, wind is another huge factor. On a
Yep.
slick, calm day, it makes it so hard to catch fish
Yep,
sometimes.
you want that
but-
chop.
Yep, exactly. The walleye chop, yeah. So there's definitely so many factors that go into it. Everything changes day to day.
Yeah.
The fish move too. You could go out on a Friday night and crush them. And we caught so many, and then the next day you go back out there and they're
Nothing.
gone because they've moved to another spot by this point, and now you're, okay, we got to go find them again.
Yeah, and Minnesota's so unique to the rest of the country. I mean, well, the Midwest, I suppose, but because our lakes freeze.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
it's a whole process. And
Yep.
the southern, I suppose, they don't change too much.
No, I mean, the fish still move and things like that, but they do not have ice fishing down there, and they think we're crazy. Like, that's
Yep.
probably the number one question I get asked about when I go down there is, have you ever been ice fishing? And I'm like, yeah, I've grown up done it my whole life. And, oh, that's on my bucket list. That's really something I got to, and I'm like, all right, come on up, we'll go, It's something that's really kind of unique to them.
I suppose
Foreign.
a lot of people are like, you go on the lake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No boat?
Walk on the
You guys
lake.
drive
Trucks?
on the lake? You spend the night out there? I'm like,
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's called an
Animals.
ice house. We
Exactly.
stay in
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes they go in the water.
yeah,
It's just like, we still do it.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So do trucks.
One thing I think is unique about Princeton here too is that we have the Rum River, right? And the lakes around here are great. Green Lake, you have Blue Lake, you have all these other smaller ones too, and they're just outside of town or in town. But even just some of the stories in my own personal fishing experiences, just even with the Rum River, like I grew up just outside of town on the Rum River, so all through my childhood, I got to fish the river, and it was so unique because, again, the season, the time, that everything mattered, but you'd find, like, these spots that you just knew, like, I know when it rains and, like, the water's like this, and if days like that, I can go to this spot and we can hammer them. But it was so hard for me to go from, like, understanding the river so well to then going to a lake where you're like, oh my gosh, I need electronics and like all these things, and now I need a boat and like all this stuff, and
Yeah.
we can't. Yeah, it's just different. I feel like sometimes fishing the river can be easier in a sense than fishing a lake, just with like how vast the lake can be, right? Like,
Yep.
where are you supposed to fish? Are you
Yep.
supposed to fish in over here? Where's the wind at? And like, you need transportation. How deep is the water? Versus like, sometimes fishing the river, you can just pick a corner and find a pocket that's deeper and it's got some structure, and you're
Yeah.
more than likely to pull something out of there.
Less
So
equipment and
yeah, just for, I mean, even the walleyes here in town, there's a great spot where there's a good drop off and like all that stuff right here in town. So I know people fish it quite a bit.
yep.
One thing you said earlier, and probably a lot of people understand this, but maybe somebody that doesn't, is like the walleye chop. What is the walleye chop? Could you explain that to somebody? Like, what is
Sure.
walleye chop?
It's just a light wind, honestly, that creates, a small ripple or chop or small waves, on the water. Slick calm is when there's no wind, and we've all seen, when the lake kind of looks like glass, and it's beautiful, and it's great for outdoor recreation. But when you're fishing, you want a little bit of waves. You don't want the 4-foot waves that are rocking the boat, and although you can really catch them sometimes when it is like that, but typically, yeah, you want a chop on the water, yeah, for lack of a better term. But yeah, it's just basically small waves and a light wind.
So what is the reason? Like, why is that? Why do you want a chop?
Well, good question. It's basically the fish can't see as well when it's choppy, and so they're more likely to react to a bait just coming across. Whereas, when it's slow and it's hot, they're very lethargic. They're kind of like us. Like, we don't work a whole lot when it's really hot outside
Yep.
or anything like that. And so when it's overcast skies or choppy conditions or something, and the bait are moving around and the stuff's being blown in, that's when they're eating a lot of the time. Bait fish, you usually want to fish where the wind is being blown into, because that's oftentimes when all the food gets kind of blown into these fish, and then they will turn on and they'll start eating at that point. Whereas when it's calm, everything's kind of just lethargic and stagnant and not moving a whole heck of a lot. Even when something's coming across, they're not going to work for it, basically.
Right. Yeah.
So for lakes that are more clear, probably not as good for fishing?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It kind of depends on the style of fishing. If a lake is fairly dirty or not a lot of clarity,
Yeah.
you want to have a vibration or something that will draw their attention or catch the fish's attention in the water. Whereas when it's very clear water, you need to be much more finessey about it and how you present your bait. Oftentimes you'll use, soft plastics and things like that, things that are moving much more slowly that a fish can bite and attack.
Okay.
In less water clarity, you want reaction strikes. That's when you want to throw, spinner baits or crank baits or things like that, things that wobble and move and displace water and that the fish can feel and hear, and then they'll attack that. When it's clear water and you're doing that, it doesn't really turn on the fish as much. They can see the bait. They realize, oh, yeah, that's not what I'm trying to eat at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So zebra mussels is that one of the big problems with lakes? Because they eat all the algae and...
Sure. I'm not really educated enough to say, that is good or bad. It certainly changes the lake. It's changed Mille Lacs greatly in the last 20 years. Mille Lacs is a very, very clear lake. And so it just, again, changes kind of the tactics. It's still loaded with walleye,
right,
but you have to finesse them a much more. And they're a lot more kind of smart and picky because they can see a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Well, the last few minutes, do you want to do some questions?
Yeah, let's just do some fun questions because we know that
Sure.
you got to
I
get
like fun
going.
questions.
So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, what's the biggest fish you've ever caught?
Oh, gosh, what species?
Any?
So one of my first years on the job with FLW, I got to go fishing out on Lake Erie, and it's a huge walleye fishery. This was back when we did run walleye tournaments. We don't anymore. Now they're strictly bass tournaments.
All bass, okay.
But we used to be involved in walleye tournaments, and so I was out there for a walleye tournament. I got to go fishing on one of the off days with one of the competitors, and we caught 7 walleyes over 30 inches, which if you catch a walleye over 28 inches, that's considered a trophy.
Okay.
And so I've never had a day of fishing like that before in my life. I've never had one since, but we caught some huge walleyes that were just 30 plus inches. That was a lot of fun. I've caught a trophy smallmouth out on Mille Lacs before, which is like a 7.5 pounder. That was an amazing fish. It looked like a giant football. It's akin to catching a 10-pound bass down south. Like they don't grow that big up here as they do down south. So, those are probably my 2 biggest ones. I've caught some big pike back in the day, but I don't know that I've ever weighed or measured them. I've got pictures, but yeah.
There's I know of people that just catch giant footballs, smallies on Mille Lacs late season when it's getting kind of colder.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, our arms hurt.
Yeah.
Like we're done fishing.
So many people come up from down south now for that. I mean, Mille Lacs is known across the country for its smallmouth. And it's a really special lake because you can catch trophies in so many different species. You can catch
trophy pike,
a world record muskie. You can catch a giant walleye, perch, smallmouth bass. And that's what makes Mille Lacs so special is the chance at a trophy, and that's unique to that fishery. Something you can't get when you go fishing at Green Lake or Blue Lake. You can catch them, but you're not going to catch the giant that you can on Mille Lacs. So,
is it true that there is not a walleye bigger than 28 inches on Mille Lacs?
No, that is not true. That is not true.
There's so many guys that they go fishing up there like, I can never just break the 28 inch.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah. They are unicorns. They're hard to find.
They are harder.
But they do exist in there. Yeah. I have seen them.
All right. Another fun question. If you could fish with any person, living or dead, who would you choose?
Oh, gosh. Probably, I'm going to get all sentimental and sappy here, but my grandpa. So my grandpa passed away when I was probably 7 or 8, and he bought me my first tackle box back in the day, and he had a bass boat, and he was a huge bass fisherman. And at the time, again, I was a 7-year-old kid. I didn't like bass fishing. I'd never gone bass fishing in my life. I didn't really know. And so he passed away, and 20 years later, I got that job at FLW, and now I'm working with some of the old school pros that we see on TV, Bill Dance and Jimmy Houston and these guys that had TV shows back in the day that my grandpa was a huge fan of.
Yeah.
He would get such a kick out of my career right now and what I'm doing.
Oh, I'm sure
and,
he'd be so proud.
And so I would love to just go fishing, see what his skill level is. I have no idea how good he was or terrible but I did. My aunt gave me his old fishing jacket, and it's one of those kind of old school jackets that has patches all over the place. And so at a tournament last year, I busted out this jacket and I wore it to the weigh-in, and I thought I was so cool. And I got a ton of compliments on it, like, wow, where did you get that from? Like, this is from like the late 70s, and it's just one of those vintage things. So to answer your question, it would be my grandpa. I've never got to fish with him. He never knew anything about what I do or anything like that. Right. And I would really just love to kind of hear his thoughts.
That.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Joe, thank you for your time today. I appreciate all the stories. Hopefully we can have you back on too.
Yeah,
There's
of course.
always more to talk about fishing.
Yeah. I love talking fishing. Like I said, I do it all the time. So happy to do it. And thank you guys so much for having me on.
All right. Well, until next time, this is Zach and Mary signing off. This is Princeton. Stay here,
play here, and fish here.